In spring 1942, there were 250 Americans of Japanese ancestry enrolled at 6 California State University campuses. On February 19, 1942, Executive Order 9066 and the military orders that followed forever changed the course of their lives. These young adults, the Nisei, born and raised in California, full of promise and hope, were forced to leave their communities and drop out of college. Some moved to an inland state, but most were rounded up and sent to live in an American-style concentration camp in the most desolate parts of the country. Manzanar, Tule Lake, Topaz, Heart Mountain, Rower, Gila River, Poston, Amachi, Jerome, Minidoka became their new home for the duration of World War II. After their release, many Nisei never had the chance to return to college. Their dreams of a college education shattered. In the spring of 2010, the CSU located 125 of these former students and presented them with special honorary bachelor's degrees at commencement ceremonies at 6 campuses. These degrees, although long overdue, brought tears, smiles, and a sense of closure for the former CSU students and the community. The barbed wire fences that imprisoned them and tore them away from their aspirations have now been replaced by the dignity of their very special honorary bachelor's degrees. Now we will hear from Hatsune Fukuchi and the son of Yoshiko Miya, degree recipients from San Francisco State University.
This degree and ceremony helps restore the dignity and honor of loyal Americans wrongfully removed from their schools, homes, farms, businesses, and careers. They were held against their wills during World War II by their own government without charges or trial. Their only crime was they looked like the enemy.
All 3 of these former students were admitted in September of 1940. They were forced to leave in 1942, and had they not been interned, they would have graduated in the class of 1944.
My name's Ken Miyake. My mom is Yoshi Miyake or Yoshiko Miyake, and she was in Jerome, Arkansas.
My name is Hatsune Fukuchi, and I live in San Leandro.
My mom was born in Hanford, California, and she was raised on a farm in Hanford. My father was born and raised in Fresno, and he was raised on a farm. He farmed part-time, and I think the farming experience made my dad realize that he probably didn't want to be a farmer. And my dad went to UC Berkeley and was an optometrist.
Oh, I was born in Hakalau. That's a small town outside of Hilo in Hawaii, the Big Island. My father was born in Hawaii, but my mother was born in Japan. My father, when I was younger, was a taxi driver. In those days, people didn't have too many cars. And so my dad had a taxi service to go from where we were living in Hakalau, that's about 15 miles from Hilo, and used to take them to the city in Hilo to go to doctors or wherever they needed to go.
My father's born in California, my grandfather's born in Hawaii, and on my mother's side they're from the Sacramento Elk Grove area, and they met in camp during World War II. It was one of those good news, bad news. The bad news was that they were in camp. The good news was that had they not met, I wouldn't be here, so those are the kinds of ways of history. And one of the touchstones in our community is the camps the Japanese were incarcerated in during World War II. it's always a reference point. Eventually, during the conversation with new friends or strangers, even if they're Japanese American, somewhere along the way the question comes up, were you in camp? If you were in camp, what camp? If you weren't in camp, what camp was your family in? And that becomes just a touchstone for our community. And in the beginning, very few in our community talked about it after the war. It was, as described by a second-generation Nisei activist named Edison Nuno. He described it as like being a rape victim, where you don't want to talk about it, but it has a tremendous impact on your life.
My mother was a music major, and she went to San Francisco with 3 good friends that she graduated Hanford High School with. My mom played the piano and the organ at the Buddhist church in Fowler for a long, long time. She was there for approximately 2.5, 3 years before she was forced to go to camp. And I think one of the regrets she had in life was not being able to get her degree.
My parents didn't, but my 2 brothers went to college.
She basically said, you know, the best way to get ahead and the best equalizer in life is education.
I believe they expected me to go to college. They never had mentioned it, you know, but I came to San Francisco to go to college because there was no where I could stay in Honolulu to go to the university, because I was living in the Big Island. And so my aunt asked my dad to come to San Francisco and stay with her, and that's why I came to San Francisco and went to college.
Conferral of these honorary degrees is a wonderful idea. It is well deserved and symbolically very important. As someone who experienced internment myself, this ceremony has a lot of personal meaning for me as well as you, the honorees. However, I was only 6 years old at the time and went through 1st through 3rd grades in the Minidoka, Idaho internment camp. If I had been old enough to be in college like all of you honorees, I can only imagine how you must have felt to be forced to terminate your higher education under these traumatic and demoralizing circumstances. Your average age at the time of internment was about 19, and almost all of you were American-born citizens. I'm sure your education in American schools imbued you with a deep belief in such American ideals as democracy, freedom, and liberty, making you among the most loyal and patriotic citizens of this nation.
The interesting thing for me was the experience of those that were going to the college, the university, the state colleges that existed, and community colleges at the time. Their sense of their future was the proverbial rug was pulled out from underneath them. So it was about finishing up, tying together loose ends, putting closure to, and that was the motivation for doing AB 37.
I think at the critical juncture in their life, which I think is a college experience, and trying to map out what you want to do in life, when that's totally disrupted, I think it's life altering. I don't know where my mother would be. My mother would say that she was very satisfied meeting my dad and raising a family.
Well, I guess I liked it, and I expected to get out of college, you know. I enjoyed school there. It was just different, you know, from high school or junior college. My supervisor told me that there were no teachers of Japanese ancestry in California, so I shouldn't go into that field. But I told her that I was planning to go back to Hawaii.
And another aspect of it that I found really interesting, and I want to do more research on it, is the number of women that went to college. I mean, we're talking about the 1940s, and there was an extraordinary number of women, Japanese American women, that were going to college.
My uncle, who worked for Shiseido, was a vice president of product development, and he used to travel all over the world for Shiseido. My mother's older brother, Tom, went to the University of Nebraska. He was a dean of the School of Pharmacology at Purdue, and then was later hired at the University of North Carolina to be the chairman and the dean of the pharmacy department there. And then my mom, the youngest one in the family, my mom's family was Frank, my Uncle Frank, and he was a physician. So, if anything, my mother's family, hands down, education was very, very important because it gave you the opportunity to excel in life. My mom talks fondly of making good friends at Jerome in the camps, but one of the downsides, my mother said, even though while she was doing it she didn't realize this was happening, was that she was in her early 20s then. So she would go off and eat meals and do things with her friends. So when she looked back at that episode, while she made great, long-lasting, lifetime friends, there was no family unity. The family basically didn't do much together.
In speaking to many Nisei about their internment experiences, I came to realize what a profound psychological impact internment had on them, and why so many of them have been very reticent to talk about it, even to their kids.
I felt that they don't belong there, but what can you do? What can I do when the government, the U.S. government, says they have to go to this relocation camps, the different relocation camps?
My mother used to say, well, what could you do? Even though she said a lot of the Niseis were very, very upset. And if you go back to the camp experience too, my mother used to say that since most of the Iseis, their parents, which were Iseis, only spoke Japanese, some of them spoke great English, but the majority probably only spoke Japanese and were very comfortable speaking Japanese. When they went to the camps, most of the times the authorities running the camps would want someone picked in the family who can converse only in English. So the roles started changing, and usually the eldest son or the eldest daughter would be in charge of speaking to whoever they needed to speak to who were in charge of the camp.
It is certainly understandable that many Nisei would not want to share such pain with their children, to want to protect them, to shield them from such painful experiences, so they could grow up seeing the promise and hope of America rather than its injustices and cruelties. But it should also be noted that even during the darkest days of our incarceration, there were glimmers of hope.
That I don't belong in that group to go to camp. There was no reason for me to, because I'm an American citizen, but I couldn't fight the army or the government, so he got drafted before Pearl Harbor in the summer of '41, and he was drafted, and then I know he went to a camp in somewhere in Chicago, and then he was sent to Fort Riley, and I was married there in Manhattan, Kansas, which is not far from Fort Riley. So instead of going to camp, I went to Colorado on my own and got married. So after a year, he was supposed to get out of the army, but there was Pearl Harbor, so he couldn't get out. And so we spent the rest of his life as an army personnel.
I know that she was bitter simply because of the experience. Number one, her college education was interrupted at San Francisco State. Plus, she went through the experience of having to basically see her parents sell everything at a huge discount before they were taken off to camp. I remember my father and my mother telling me of other neighbors and friends of theirs who lost everything. They turned over their farm or their business to what they considered good friends. When they came back, the farm or the business was changed into someone else's name, and they never got it back.
There wasn't much work we could do. I worked as a grocery store cashier, for the AMPT company for a while.
My mother met my father in camp, and my dad left early to go to Utah. So my mom left camp and went to I think Parowan, Utah, and married my father. And my father was farming at that time. And then they moved back to the Fresno Fowler area.
So I didn't go back to school, but I was going everywhere else, you know, since he was being transferred.
The discrimination was pretty bad. I remember driving through the San Joaquin Valley with my parents, and this was probably in the early 50s, and we'd stop at a service station, and they were all service, whether you actually got service at that time, and no one would come out and put gas in my parents' car, so we'd have to try to find another service station.
They went to the barber shop for a haircut, and they said, sorry, we can't give you a haircut because you're Japanese.
I remember going to restaurants, not being served, so we, as a family, get up and jump in our car and try to find another restaurant to have lunch or dinner at.
There was no work I could do, so, you know, I did housework. After that, my girlfriend says, Hatsie, I think you can take up substituting. So she says, I heard that, you know, even if you don't have a degree, you could substitute if you have gone to college for some time. So I applied and I substituted for years.
They all survived camp. They were one of the last to leave Jerome. They went to Utah for a while, and then they came back to Hanford. My dad's father was a farmer, and they had a very good neighbor who took care of everything. So when they came back, the Price family gave my dad's father and my dad back the farm, and they were great friends throughout the years.
I think it was in 1946, sometime in 1946, that the people that were sent to the relocation camps were released, and they came back to where they wanted. But I felt bad for them because they don't have most of them didn't have a place to go. They had sold their houses or they were renting the place when they went to camp. So when they were released to go back, a lot of them didn't have a place to go. They didn't have a job. So most of them worked as gardeners. So in those days, there were a lot of gardeners of Japanese ancestry.
The awarding of these honorary degrees will hopefully help make up to a small degree for the involuntary disruption of their education and bring closure to this most unfortunate chapter in their lives. But I also believe the awarding of these honorary degrees is important for the symbolic significance of the message it sends to all Americans. It tells us that part of America's greatness is because it can own up to and make amends for its mistakes. Perhaps more importantly, it also tells us that we cannot take our democracy for granted, but that all Americans have a responsibility and stake in preserving our freedoms and liberties for all groups in our society, regardless of race, religion, or nationality.
First that I will be awarding the degree to is Hatsumi Areta Fukuchi, who was born in Hawaii, and her San Francisco State studies focused on education and the social sciences. And this evening she is accompanied by her son and daughter and their spouses.
I thought it was wonderful that it had happened after, 60 years or so, you know? And I thought it would never happen, but it happened, and I felt really comfortable and happy.
My brother Greg and I accepted it for my mother. And I think, if anything, is probably one of the proudest moments in my brother Greg's life and in my life, because I know how much my mom cherished education. I think if she was there when she was in the cap and gown, I think she would have taken off her mortar cap and threw it up in the air and would probably be jumping up and down with joy. Yeah.
There were two others besides me, but I don't even remember them seeing in college, you know.
Helen Nita Hori was born in Loomis, California, studied music and recreation at San Francisco State. She re-entered the university, actually, in September of 1945 and did receive her BA in liberal arts in June 1946 with honors. She began graduate studies in the summer of 1951 and received her elementary school credential in June 1953. This evening, she is accompanied by her 2 sons, her daughter-in-law, and 2 granddaughters.
Project, it's made our family understand that maybe we should try to get our archival history in order. And some of the younger nieces and nephews have a project now on trying to interview some of our aunts and uncles who were in the camps and try to find out just what happened.
Ikaya Ruth Kitakawa Sugigawa. Sugigawa? Did I got that right? Leroy, I got it? Okay. A San Francisco native, was a music student at San Francisco State, and she returned to the university in the fall of 1954 and enrolled in a speech class. She holds a degree from the University of Colorado with majors in education and music. And this evening, she's accompanied by her godson and his spouse and her close friends. Please award her.
I think it's nice if they knew what their parents went through. I'm sure they can't imagine what, they went through. I didn't go to camp at all, so I really don't know enough, anyway.
It doesn't make up for half a century, but it helps, I think.
I believe we must remind ourselves of the immortal words of Pastor Martin Niemöller, who, in recounting his experiences in Nazi Germany, wrote, and I quote, "In Germany they came for the communists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak up for me."
I think that's the point. It's not just a history lesson. It's not nostalgia. It's not going back. What it is really going forward. It's a teaching moment to talk about the importance of the Constitution, the importance of people's rights. And no matter the environment, no matter the ethnicity, no matter the gender preference, whatever, people have these rights at all times as Americans. And you can't take them lightly. You can't, just because the situation may be very negative around a war experience or terrorism or whatever the case may be, you can't use that as a reason to trample people's constitutional rights. And as an individual, you have a right of due process, and as an American, you have the protections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And those things were violated in this chapter of history. And oftentimes we go up to the edge. Sometimes individuals step over, and they violate these rights, and we have to pull people back. And I think it also showed the resiliency of the government in their ability to finally redress and apologize for the experience and make corrections in our democracy.
For me, going to college is not just a possibility. It is an expectation. I know, however, that 70 years ago, the opportunity to go to college was taken away from the Nisei. They had done nothing wrong except for being born Japanese in America. Because of the Nisei's courage, loyalty, and hard work, Japanese Americans are recognized today as loyal Americans. Because of their sacrifices, I will be able to go to college. We must commit ourselves to never again letting liberty and justice be taken away from any American just because the color of their skin is different. Okage-sama de. Because of you, I am. Thank you for what you have done for Japanese Americans, for all Americans, and for me. You are like a handprint on my heart. I will not forget what the Nisei have done. Congratulations on receiving your diploma.
In concluding, let me just say to our Nisei honorees that in accepting these honorary degrees, you are speaking up, not only for Japanese Americans, but for all Americans. Your experiences should be both a warning and an inspiration to all Americans. It warns us that the U.S. Constitution alone will not protect our liberties and freedoms, that it's just a piece of paper which is given life only by the efforts and vigilance of all of us to maintain our democratic principles and ideals for all of our citizens. And it inspires us because after the internment, you did not allow yourself to be consumed in bitterness, but through hard work and determination, you rebuilt your lives and helped ensure a brighter future for upcoming generations of Japanese Americans. So, on behalf of all Japanese Americans, and dare I say for all Americans, I want to express our gratitude to the honorees and the entire Nisei generation for their fortitude, resilience, and sacrifice that has left us with such an enduring and important legacy.
You've heard the never-before-told stories that are part of the history of the California State University and the country. We all must make sure that actions like this never happen to any group of people anywhere again.